HFC kids, it's Jonna Willis, your children's director.
Bobby.
So excited to get.
I need you to
Look, why don't you let me do things sometimes?
Good morning, HFC kids. We're ready for another week studying the life of Moses. And last week we talked about how the Israelites had been kept in slavery and were being oppressed by the Pharaoh. Like the Pharaoh was being really mean to them, and it was making all the baby boys be killed, and the rest of the people were slaves, and it was terrible. So Moses ended up becoming like a prince of Egypt. He grew up in the palace with the Pharaoh and the Pharaoh's daughter. He grew up watching his people. He knew that the Israelites were his people, and he kept seeing them be hurt and be whipped and be used as slaves. And he knew it wasn't fair that he was in power in the Pharaoh's kingdom, but the rest of his people were being hurt. So in Exodus, we're picking up our story in Exodus chapter 2, verses 11 and 12. And it says, "One day when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and looked on their burdens. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand." So he ended up killing this Egyptian man for hurting the Hebrew people. He just was so angry. But then he realized he couldn't stay there anymore. They found out that the Egyptian had died, and he had to run away and live in a new place called Midian. He ran away to try and escape all of his problems, and he became a totally different type of person. He lived with people who weren't Hebrew people, and he did jobs different than what he was used to. He ended up becoming a shepherd. So we're going to play a game about herding sheep and maybe what it would have been like for Moses to have been taking care of all of those sheep. Okay, so we're outside and I'm going to explain how we play this game. And I used to play this game and we called it herding sheep, which makes sense because we're talking about how Moses was a shepherd. You can use cotton balls and color them into your own team colors, but we're going to use, for the sake of you being able to see them easier out in the grass, we're going to use wadded up pieces of paper. Lena has orange papers on her side, and then I have red papers on my side. So what the goal is you have to get all of your pieces, all of your team's colors onto your side of the field. So I have these little bars marking the middle. So you could use, if you're playing inside, you could use cotton balls as your sheep, and you could use like a piece of tape through the middle as your divider. So Lena is going to try and get all of the red pieces from that side over to her side. And I'm going to be on this side trying to get the orange pieces onto my side. But the rules are, if I touch Lena while she's holding a piece, she has to drop it where she is. And she can't throw it, and she can't carry more than one at the same time. She can only carry one at a time. So we're gonna try it. Are you ready, Lena? So that was a lot of fun. I hope you guys get to play that with your family, maybe with your mom or your dad or brothers or sisters. That would be super fun. But that's what Moses was. He was a shepherd. He had to run around collecting the sheep, making sure they were all behaving, making sure they were eating and sleeping and drinking water. And that was his job. That's what he became, was just a shepherd. And that's a pretty ordinary job. But God knew that Moses was not going to be an ordinary man. So we pick our story back up in chapter 3 of Exodus, verses 2 through 5. He's out in the wilderness, like in the fields with his sheep. And it said, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was not burning, yet it was consumed. So that means that the bush was on fire, but nothing was burning away. You know how if you burn a marshmallow for too long, it starts to fall apart? This wasn't falling apart. The bush, it wasn't burning up. It was crazy, nothing like he had ever seen before. In verse 3 it says, Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. And when Moses saw that he had turned aside to see, God called him out of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. And he said, Do not come near here. Take your sandals off of your feet, for the place you are standing on is holy ground. So, if he had sandals on, he was told to take his shoes off. Maybe if you have shoes on, you can take yours off to remind yourself that God had commanded Moses to take his shoes off to show that he was listening to God and to submit to being on this holy ground. And God tells him, I'm going to send you back to your people. I'm sending you back to Egypt. And I've seen that they're doing all of these terrible things. These Egyptians are doing terrible things. Remember, last week we talked about how God was all-seeing, omniscient. He could see everything. He knew everything that was going on. And he said, I'm going to send you back. I'm going to watch over you, and I'm going to send you back to Egypt, and you're going to be the one to save them from this slavery. And Moses said to God in verse 13, If I come to the people of Israel and I say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What do I tell them? Have you ever gone up to your brother or sister and said, you're supposed to clean your room, and then they say, yeah, who said? And you say, well, Dad said you have to clean your room. That's basically what's happening here. He says, what happens if I go to the people and they don't believe me and they don't listen to me? And God said, you can tell them that I sent you. And he says, well, what is your name? What do I say? Do I just say God sent me? And he said, God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. And God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. And this will be my name forever, and this is how I will be remembered for all generations. And he said, I know the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do in it. And he will let you go. So basically he's telling Moses, you're not meant to be here and be a shepherd forever. You're going to do great things, and my power is going to go along with you. I'm going to do amazing things in Egypt to show that those are my people and I'm taking care of them. So most of this that we talk about we'll see in next week's lesson, so you'll have to tune in again next week, and where we'll see how God was with him and how God stretched out his mighty hand against the Pharaoh and against Egypt. Those are some big things, some big plans that God has for Moses. So last week I said that one of the main reasons we're learning about Moses is in the story of Moses we can see how big of a deal God really is. Arguably, in previous lessons, in the stories of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, you could say that maybe those people were just lucky. Maybe they were just really smart. Maybe they were just really clever, like Joseph. Maybe Joseph was just he just had really good ideas, and that's how he was able to store the grain and save the people. Maybe Abraham was just lucky to have kids, even though he was old. But in the story of Moses, by the time Moses comes along, There is now no argument that God is huge and powerful and strong, and there's stuff that happens in Moses' story that couldn't happen just because someone's lucky or just because someone's smart or somebody can do some cool little trick. It's big, amazing things. Like in this story, we're talking about how God sees what's happening in Egypt, but he's also seeing what's happening when Moses is out tending to the sheep. That's God's omniscience. Remember, all seeing or all knowing. That's omniscience. But this week, we're also talking about God's omnipresence and how he can be anywhere. Presence is in like where you're standing. And he can be standing here, but also be standing in Xenia or in Cedarville or in northern Springfield or in southern Springfield or Eden or Donaldsville or anywhere, wherever you live. God's there just like God's here. He's in all places, omnipresence. And here we see that God used that omnipresence to draw attention to the burning bush and got Moses' attention in order to lead him back to Egypt. And those are some pretty amazing things. Our bottom line for this week is that God can't be held back. There are some things that are just rules in the world. There are some times that if I'm going to hold something up, it's going to fall. That's a rule. If I lift my hair up, it's going to fall. That's a rule of the world. But God isn't held back by those rules. If he wanted to hold my hair up and then just leave it there, it would just stay there. I can't do that. If God wanted to get through this table, I can't get through this table. It's just going to stay here because there's a table in the way. God's not held back. He can go right through it. We see that more in the rest of Moses' story, but I wanted to introduce you to that this week, that God can't be held back and that God is all-knowing, omniscient, and God is all places, omnipresent. And our verse for this week comes from when God says, I am who I am. The language that God used in this part, he wasn't speaking in English like we do. The language that he used, the phrase I am who I am could mean am like what's happening right now, or it could mean I am like I will be, or it could be I am like I was. So he's saying I was, I am, and I will be. And also I was, I am, and I will be. God's everywhere. He's omnipresent. So our verse for this week comes from not the beginning of the Bible like we have here. It comes from the very end of the Bible. It's actually the last page of my Bible. And Revelation chapter 22, verse 13. It's God speaking, and he says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last. I am the beginning and the end. He's all places. He's both at the very beginning of time and at the very end of time. Alpha and Omega means like from A to Z. He's everywhere. He's everything. So that's our verse for this week. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. So another verse, though, that you can look up with your families, moms and dads, if you want something else to read about how God is omnipresent, read Psalm 139. And that talks about how God is in the heavens, but he's also here on earth. And that no matter where we go, we can't escape him. Moses ran away from Egypt, but he didn't run away from God. So as we talk about the Alpha and Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end, we're going to focus more on that I am who I am and how God is all powerful in all places, all of those things in our burning bush craft. So I've already colored in this coloring page, which is available on our kids drive, or if you got a box or like a packet set, you should have a copy of this. And I already colored in part of it. And as I was coloring it in, I was thinking about some crazy things about how powerful God is and that he was able to burn this without it actually burning up or going anywhere. So I'm now going to add the flames. And I have red and orange, I did those backwards, red and orange color or tissue paper. And what I'm gonna do is I'm going to just tear off a little piece wad it up so it's kind of sticking up like a flame, and then I'm going to glue it onto a section of the bush, like this. And I'm gonna do that with several different pieces until I cover the whole thing. And it's going to, and if I had a brother or sister here, or like I have Bobby here, hi Bobby, I could talk to Bobby about how amazing God is. Isn't God awesome, Bobby?
So awesome.
So we would talk about some amazing things that he's doing. Maybe if you already know the story, you know what he means by when he says that he's going to outstretch his mighty hand. Or if you've ever seen anything as cool as a bush that doesn't burn up. Or you can talk about how God is in all places, and that even if you go to school, God is with you at school. He can see you, he's omniscient, but he's also omnipresent, which means he's there with you. And you can talk about that with your family, with your brothers and sisters, with your mom and your dad, with your grandma or grandpa, whoever you're watching this with, whoever you're doing the craft with, until you fill up the whole thing. I only have 6 pieces on here, but I would love to see pictures of you completing this whole fire with your little pieces of flames coming off the paper. And that's all we have for this week. We learned about God being omnipresent and how even when Moses ran away, he couldn't run away from God. I hope that you memorized that verse for this week, the Revelation 22:13. I hope you memorize that. I hope you finish this and you can have some good conversations with your family talking about how God is so powerful. We'll see you next week, HFC kids. Bye. I have part 1, part 2. Cool. Wipe it down. Wipe.